Hey,
What's up, y'all?
what's happening?
How you doing, Brian?
You are an Iron Man.
Brian and I got home, both did an Ironman. Brian was phenomenal, and I
Who are
finished.
also phenomenal.
I finished. So I don't want to build expectations too much, but this podcast is brought to you by two Ironmen. No, so thank you. It's funny. A lot of people who listen to this podcast have asked me about
Oh, really?
the podcast. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's
And
funny.
it's like, oh, cool, weird. What other personal things have I talked about that I don't even realize?
Oh,
is
that's
out
a
there?
good question.
So today's actually an interesting day, Brian.
Also, though, can I before you do the
Yep.
interesting thing? I'm just like, listen, who out there wants to run an Ironman with me next year?
Ooh,
Because I'm still kicking around Tri-Church.
not me, by the way.
Tri-Church.
I will not. Tri-Church is a great idea. So in Kansas City, if you're listening to this,
Let's go.
that's actually, yeah. Brian's had this idea in his head for a couple of years now.
If you pay for my race next year, I will train you. Sorry.
That's a good idea.
We don't normally do advertising or begging, but
do you get to go to World Championships?
They haven't emailed me back, but
okay.
Anyway.
Brian qualified for World Championships, y'all. So that's a big deal. But I think he was supposed to be there to reserve his spot, which we all left.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Anywho,
right.
so today's is an interesting day. For a handful of reasons, but Brian and I were just sitting here catching up on life because we didn't spend much time together this past weekend. We had other things going on, and
well, emotionally, there was a lot.
There was a lot going on. Yeah, I don't want to get too personal.
Yeah,
podcast. No, it was fine. But where we're at now is like we're just talking about some ministry stuff, some things on our heart, and then so Brian is doing some training and teaching this upcoming weekend or next weekend or in the next few weeks.
Yeah. 3 weeks out. Yeah.
And I was just just talking about some of the things that God was teaching him. And I'm just like, at the end of it, I was like, all right, time out. Can we just push record and make this a podcast? And he was like, sure, it'll help me prepare a little bit more for this.
There's a little selfish angle here.
Yeah. No, I actually thought it was really important. And just maybe I'll set up what I was hearing you say really shortly, and then you can kind of correct me.
Okay.
I don't even know if that would not be as efficient as you just kicking us off.
Okay.
I think you should just kick us off. Tell me
we'll see where we go.
Yeah. Even like the beginning point with using that AI imagery of the castle. Like I just think that would be cool. So start us off.
Well, I'll tell the whole story. And for those of you that listen to the podcast and you're normally used to a bunch of banter and there's back and forth, and this might be me talking for a while. So if you don't like my voice, sorry about that.
But this might be the week that you get the real.
Yeah, that's true.
Like AI says no.
Yeah. So I was telling Cory, I got invited to do this speaking at this thing, and maybe a month and a half ago. So I've been sitting with this like, I got to get this thing written. I want it written. I want it in me and done. But then there was that race in the middle, and I was like, I don't know. I just couldn't get my mind around it. I had a lot of other stuff to get done before we left town. But it's still sitting there. Like, this has to get written. I need to think about it and spend a lot of time just going, Jesus, spark some creativity here. They gave us some direction, and the direction was around we as the people of God, especially as leaders, we as the people of God need to think about not building our castle, but pursuing the kingdom. Seek first the kingdom of God, Matthew 6:33, all this stuff. So I'm like, all right, I know this idea. I like that idea. So I think we got back Monday. So this was like Tuesday morning, maybe early in the morning. I felt like I sort of had this like wake up where I'm going, this feels like the Spirit woke me up. And I had this image of, like I've seen some of these humorous comics where people are using AI generation to get images that are like, it's like, hey, show me a millennial family. And then it's like, make the mom this sort of character, that's like super into something.
Yeah.
And then it's like, maybe she likes gold-plated stuff, and then it's like more gold-plated,
Yeah.
and more gold-plated, and every image is just an exaggeration where you're just like, oh, that's so crazy. But then you're also like, maybe that is real life, you know? So the image that I had in my head was like, I felt like the Spirit was going like a castle and this beautiful landscape around it. But then it was kind of playing on that idea of like, yeah, so build a bigger castle. What actually happens to the land around it? When you build a bigger castle, you need more resources. You cut down more trees. We have to feed more people that are inside the walls. So like we cut down more trees and we're tilling the land. But like, because we're using so many of the resources, the land is actually suffering. And then I was like, what happens if you build a bigger castle? What happens? You know, it's like, so I went to AI generation. I actually did this. It was, I mean, it's compelling. I
It's
just
very
said,
compelling. Yeah.
build a castle with a thriving landscape. And then it was like, show me what happens when the castle's bigger and the land suffers. And it's like, the castle's much bigger and it's a sad image. And then I just wrote bigger castle, more suffering. And the last image is so just, it's morbid was the word that came to mind. Like the cracked land, the river is gone. It's just desolate. So I'm sitting with that image and I'm like, I felt like Jesus was going, I want you to really talk about the whole ecosystem around it. Because we talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
We have to think not just building castles. When we think about kingdom building, it's ecosystem building. So I texted our friend Lissa and I said, Lissa, you love gardening. Tell me about building an ecosystem, like cultivating ecosystems. And she texted back some really insightful things about thriving ecosystems rely on healthy cycling of nutrients and energy through essential processes. And she said, you can think of an ecosystem like shalom. I was like, oh, that's really good. You know, I bet if I drop that in a message, you know, so,
that'll preach.
Yeah. And ecosystems happen, you know, like without our input really. But if you want to cultivate a healthy one, like you have to mimic a healthy one. And she said, nature doesn't have to think about creating a healthy ecosystem. It was designed that way. I mean, just all this like rich, sort of dropping great content there. And then she said, if you're like, what you really need to do is go watch this movie, The Biggest Little Farm. So it's a documentary in 2018. She said it's eye-opening. It'll spur a lot of thoughts. And boy, did it.
Well done, Lissa.
Yeah. So all credit where it's due. So I was telling Cory, this is really where all this came from.
Yeah. Yeah.
In 2018, this documentary, it follows the life of John and Molly Chester. And they buy this farm in Moore Park, California, and they're going to pursue this dream of sustainable farming. I don't really know what that means. I grew up in a farming community, like peanut farms, tobacco farms, soybean farms, like it's all around us in South Georgia. But they're like what you would call monoculture farming. There was probably some field rotation, if I remember that from social studies or something. I don't know. But it's like big fields, one crop. And the farm that they bought did that kind of farming. And so the land is just devastated. And early in the film, Molly holds up this chunk of dirt. It's just like, it's hard packed clay. And she says, this is what we're up against. And it's like dramatic effect. You know, she drops it and you're expecting 1,000 pieces. And it's just so dense. It just, you know. And the camera focuses in on that piece of clay. And you see this cracked, barren landscape. And you, like, I had this disbelief that I'm like, well, it's a documentary, so I know they do this, but I'm like, I don't know. You know? But anyway, it's powerful 90-minute documentary. It's John and Molly, this team of small workers. They hire this guy named Alan.
Like they're small, like statured, like they're
no, small team of workers.
Okay,
sorry.
I just feel like I had to get another voice in here real quick. Keep going.
A team of small workers.
Yeah, that's cool.
A small team of workers.
It's a strange detail you threw in there, but I like it.
And their goal is to completely restore this 200-acre plot of overworked, neglected land through what they call biodiversity. So they don't use chemistry. They don't use heavy machinery. or monoculture farming practices. And after 8 years of effort, they produced 500,000 pounds of food, which blew my mind. And so this included pigs, ducks, chickens, sheep, cows, and over 200 varieties of fruits and vegetables.
Delicious.
Bees, honey, flowers, all this kind of stuff.
Wow.
So in the closing scenes, they bring back this footage of Molly. She's dropping that hard packed clay, and they contrast it with these two hands reaching into the now like restored soil, and they're turning it over, and it's just like rich, black, moist. Like it's just, it's so beautiful to see.
Wow.
And John says, he's narrating this whole thing, and his line is, to bring the soil back to life, you have to infuse it with beneficial microorganisms.
What?
So,
whoa. Say that one again.
To bring soil back to life, you have to infuse it with beneficial microorganisms.
Wow.
And so
there's some goosebumps going on in that.
I felt for some reason this pressure. I got to get this thing written yesterday. And I had a whole day open to work on this. I woke up at like 4:30 and I was like, I'm going to start writing. Spend some time with Jesus and write. And 10 minutes in, I'm going, you're supposed to watch this movie. And I was like, I don't know, Lord, like I need to work.
This is efficiency time. Right?
Yeah.
This
is
not...
like nobody's up. I need to do this.
Yeah.
And it just kept like tugging on me, like, go watch this film. And when he said that 90 minutes in, I was like,
wow.
Thank you, Jesus, for whether I use this or not, just the affirmation that the work we've been doing in Kansas City, like what a gift to hear that phrase, to bring it back to life. You have to infuse it with beneficial microorganisms. And he said, like that soil that they turned over, he said it was packed with 9 billion microorganisms, which I was like, that's a lot. Like I don't have, most humans can't understand 1 billion. We just know it's a lot,
right?
But we don't have the capacity to understand like what that actually is. And so like my mind is blown. I was literally in tears. I was sitting there just like,
yeah, totally.
I don't know. Well, first of all, I was like, should I go buy some land and start instead of farming? You know, like, did I miss my calling here? And the second thing, I was like, I don't know that I've really ever witnessed. I mean, I have, but like, it was just one of those moments where you're like, have I ever really witnessed such a beautiful demonstration of restoration? Like, it's just a picture of what I think Jesus is calling us to do. What the whole narrative of Scripture is. Jeremiah, go build houses, plant gardens. Eat their produce, have children, marry their sons and daughters, have grandchildren, seek the shalom of the city to which I've sent you. It's like, woo. And this is a picture of that, like when you plant gardens and you create this biodiversity. So let me keep going for a few more minutes, because it's like the harder thing to sort of understand is it's not just like they planted a bunch of stuff. When you really invest in the entire film, you see the need for predators. So like a snail is actually a predator to a fruit tree. But like the snails thrive because of the cover crop that they put all around these fruit trees that hold water in the ground. And the snails come up, but then they start eating the fruit trees. So they introduce these ducks whose favorite food is
a yummy snail.
And they're going to town on these snails.
Fat ducks.
And so, but then like to aerate the soil, I think it's not gophers. What was it? Something else is, burrowing through, like a mole or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was, but it's like, so this aerating the soil is so good for the soil. But when you have too many of those, you got to introduce barn owls. Because you don't want that to like just destroy the soil by rooting all around in it. And by the end, they're like, now there's gopher snakes that are pursuing, these little gophers through the holes. And there's these barn owls, and there's the birds would come, just wildlife. So by the way, it's not all just like what they planted. I left that part out. Like when you cultivate this environment, you're intentional with the organic pieces of it. Wildlife comes. So there's these thousands of like I think starlings or something, and they're just pecking away at the fruit. And so they lost so much of their fruit early on in their fruit trees because these birds that are pecking at it, right?
Hmm.
Well, eventually, because of the health of the entire ecosystem, hawks come,
Hmm.
and they like, because there's hawks present, there's way less birds eating the fruit,
Mm-hmm.
so they end up
Mm-hmm.
able to harvest more fruit.
Hmm.
It's just like,
Yeah.
so watching this whole thing happen,
It's this is what it is.
he used
Ah, am I right? Am I right?
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
It's Lion King, man.
yeah.
Sorry, keep going.
So one of the last lines that was so good was, and I wrote this down, like, for every gain, it's the Chester spent 8 long years persevering through adversity, from natural weather patterns to natural predators, and for every gain, it seemed there were 2 losses, but for every loss, they had a new opportunity for creativity. And that's what he said. He said every time like we would hit something where like we're losing ground over here, he goes, I realized like what I had to do was just stop trying to fix it and just observe for a while and then be creative.
Wow.
Like, how would nature solve this problem? So that's what they did with the snails. I just watched, and I saw this duck eat a snail, and I was like, wait a second. We need to let the ducks run through the fruit trees and eat all the snails because that's natural food for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then their byproduct is also fertilizer for the trees.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, when we slow down, observe, and then allow the creativity to begin to flow from what we observe.
Interesting. Yeah.
Then we actually can bring a healthy solution, not a manufactured solution.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last line was just how do you create rich soil where life can flourish in what was once a barren wasteland? Is that you have to create an ecosystem that self-regulates through biodiversity. And I wrote, how do you cultivate rich spiritual soil where we can see the gospel flourishing? You foster an ecosystem where all of God's people have the opportunity to do the good things Jesus planned for them to do right in their network of relationships.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's it, man. It was like,
dude. Okay, so make that. Like, can we circle back to the castle?
Yeah.
Picture. I mean, I have ideas. Connect those dots in your mind.
Yeah. Here's what happened after I watched that film. I was realizing like I've been a part of church planting practices for a long time. I mean, 15 years ago, started helping with church planting. No, over 20 years ago.
Yeah, you gotta wait. How old am I? Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, I like helped. The first church plant I did was I was 20, so 22 years ago. And so, but like those are monoculture farming practices where we think about really like we're not going to reach a very diverse population.
Yeah.
It's probably going to look mostly like us. They're going to think like us.
Yeah.
They're going to vote like us. You can do all the things. And then we think about building a building. And for me, I was like watching that AI generated image and I was like, this rapes the land. Now, I'm not saying buildings are bad.
Right.
Like we're literally in a building. We're not recording outside.
It's beautiful today though.
Yeah,
we could.
But like when we do that, we're building walls. I actually Googled also what were castles used for. I mean, not that anybody's unaware.
Right.
But it was like, yep, that makes sense. And it was like castles were used to defend, and they were centers of, I don't know, they were status symbols essentially. This is how big we are. And if you're inside, you're protected.
Yeah.
And all of that shapes the way that we think about how we even interact with those that are inside the walls. And so like after watching that, I was like, man, every time we put up castles, we're stripping the land. We're telling people it's better to be in here because it's safer, which is like domesticating them. And anybody that's outside the walls, they're having to compete for the resources that the castle wants. And that's always a no-win situation for the people outside the walls.
Yeah.
Every time they will lose. And so it marginalizes. And every time our castle gets bigger, those that are on the margins get pushed further out. Like you don't get access to the wood, to the water, to the fruits and vegetables. But in that first image that, like, again, felt like the Spirit was giving me that morning was like, what if we didn't think about building castles? Like, it was like he was telling me, you're about to watch a movie where I'm going to show you what I actually want you to do,
Mm-hmm.
where you'll see, like, if you didn't build castles, but you help people plant gardens.
Mm.
And then the movie, watching that, The Biggest Little Farm, was like, yeah.
Wow, man.
What are you hearing there,
Dude?
Cory? What principles do you pull out of that?
I mean, so many. I mean, just the last sentence. What if we didn't build castles and we planted gardens? I mean, as you said it, the words that we use a lot of, planting the gospel, was immediately what I heard of. Like, we end up being able to, like, spread the beauty, get it outside the castle and be able to, right where people are at. So that's obviously the loud thing I heard there. I mean, just the way you talked about competing for resources. And I was like, what's our resources? It's like, it's good news. It's hope. It's peace. It's joy. It's these things that the world and our cities are longing for. It's community.
Well, it's also like, not to go, don't take this political if you're listening, but it's a distribution of also finances, wealth, all those sorts of things. When we go, like, to sustain the castle, we need taxation, also known as 10% of your giving, your time. But it's like, because we're funding so much, it's not like funding what happened. And I mean, there's a ton of church planting people be like, well, when we do this is all the good work we can do. I'm not.
Yeah. Like,
but don't think about, like, again, think about, like, turning over the soil and going, 9 billion microorganisms is actually what made the soil healthy. That came from, it actually comes from a lot of death. If you want, like, I was like, I don't know how to put this into a message about hope, but, like, we run from
the gospel seems to find that death and hope goes hand in hand. So you're good.
We run from that, though.
Yeah.
And going, like, it's actually the poop from a lot of these animals that is, like, that's the death and decay that is a part of enriching the soil and creating what the life that comes out of it to sustain life, but then also the continual, like, cycle of death and life that's all in there. It's like, even that, man. But just, like, going, like, it's okay, microchurches die too.
Yeah. And
it's a part of enriching the soil so that something new can come out of it.
That's so true too. I'm hearing this. So we actually, just as an organization, had a lot of leaders throughout the city learn a lot about becoming a reconciling community. We talked a lot about diversity, talked a lot about different people, different backgrounds, different skin colors, and being an organization that's empowering and coming alongside all. We just did a little survey. And one of the questions was asking, like, hey, what's a blind spot in our organization? And I forget, there was a handful of questions, but one of the answers that I threw out there to one of the questions, I forget this, it was, and I fully understand one of my unique roles in this network is that I'm probably connected to a lot of different areas of the city where most people aren't. And I was thinking, we need to have more stories and more interaction with the people from all different parts of the city. And, like, yesterday I got to sit with an Egyptian couple and talk about missions in the Middle East, the underground church, what they've been doing in Kansas City, how they saw a house church planted the other day among some immigrants and refugees. I mean, just like, so I'm sitting here and I'm hearing this story, and I'm downtown and I was hearing a story, and I was with the For the Nations team, and I got to hear like 7 different stories of different people groups or second generation immigrant families. And I'm like sitting there and I'm so excited. And I think it's painting the picture of what you're saying is, like, we're not necessarily trying to build one church organization that holds every people group and every skin color and every, but distributing it, not because we've got this one thing that's like offering everything. That's because it's like, I don't know, it's all the microorganisms. It's come up, and it's as we look at the citywide church, now things are flourishing, things are coming to life, right? And I wouldn't have been able to word it all in that way, but like we're even in the failures, and we've had lots of failures.
Yeah.
We've had microchurch networks even unplug.
Yeah.
Like we've had things that are really hard, but like, man, you're right. Like that was the other thing. It seems like every time they had a step forward, it was a step back, but every time there was a step back, there's an opportunity for new life. You know, it's like, oh, that's good, because that's it. That's what happens in movements.
Yeah.
Like churches die, but it's seed is scattered, you know?
Yeah. Here's why all this matters to me is like, it is that line of seek first the kingdom. Like Jesus, if you just look through the Gospels, there's clearly one thing he cared about: the kingdom. And like I was having a hard time because probably of Western, fairy tales and stuff. Kingdom and castles, like those two words go together. Like the castle represents the kingdom or whatever. And I think a lot of us in the church world have done that. Like, oh, there's one of our castles that represents like part of the kingdom over here. And it's like, that's not the kind of kingdom he was talking about, though.
That's right.
Like when he says the kingdom is here now, when he tells his followers in Luke 10, go to the next towns and villages, he tells them, proclaim the kingdom is here now. Mark 1:15, the time has come, the kingdom is here now. Like he just keeps saying that. And so I'm sort of meditating on that yesterday, going back to what did he mean by that? When Jesus talks about the kingdom being here now, what he's talking about is that whole flourishing thing. He's talking about being able to turn over the soil in a city and go like, look at all the microorganisms that are making the soil rich. Like when he says the kingdom is here now, he means you should not be blind anymore, because that's not part of the kingdom. In the kingdom, people like they see all the colors. You should not be lonely. Can I come to your house and have a meal with you, Zacchaeus? Like that's the kingdom step. When he says the kingdom is here, he's like, it's not some hope. He's like, no, it's with me.
Yeah.
I'm bringing it.
Yep.
And that's the kind of stuff that was sort of, again, I don't know, it's just giving me a new sense of like passion and drive for this to go like, if we can join Jesus in bringing the kingdom into the present, the soil will be rich again, because that's what he wants. And when you turn it over, there's 9 billion microorganisms.
That's good, dude.
And you can't you can't even fathom it. And you shouldn't, right? That's part of that whole, I can't imagine 9 billion microorganisms, because my brain's it doesn't work that way. Which means I'm not going to understand most of them. And I shouldn't be trying to, there's a danger in that even. I'm making another turn here, and I don't want to go too far down this road to push the metaphor too far, but it's like, don't try to categorize too much of it. Some of it's going to be like, that looks dangerous, shut it down. It's like, no, you need that.
Yeah.
That's a part of the richness of this, even though it doesn't look like your little microorganism.
Man. All right, one other observation. You mentioned in that film that I think the natural kickback response to failure, so they're seeing the snails eat the fruit, would be maybe the quick fix of, I don't know, maybe getting a bunch of pesticide or snake or
whatever
killer, snail killer, classic snail killer, that. And I don't know if retreat is the right word, or quick fix, and not sit in the failure, or failures. I don't even that's the wrong word.
Yeah.
Sit in the setback, wait for
a much better term. Yeah.
Patience. That I think is a really significant thing, maybe for listeners, leaders, everyday people throughout the city, is like, the answer is not the quick fix. The answer is to sit in the setback, to like, again, lean on God, again, wait for what he's doing, like pursue the kingdom in your waiting, and don't just do the quick fix. I think in just my history of being a church leader as well, like I think even the traditional church model, I think that's our go-to. Like we go for the quick fix immediately, right? Like what's the next program? What's the next thing that we can just throw out there? And I think a lot of people actually even invest into like missional disciple making, microchurches, disciple making, movement principles, but it's hard, or there's not the immediate fruit, or the fruit does not match what we're thinking kingdom growth or castle growth is.
Yeah.
So we quickly abandon it. I do think that is something when we went all in on this, we kind of like, cut the rope, lifeboats are gone.
Yeah.
And it's like we're forced to wait and find the answer of when the snails are eating the fruit, because we don't really have a lot of other options. And I'm not saying that we are the picture of all of this kind of idea in Kansas City, but I do think that if nothing else, we figured out how to sit in the failure. Like we sit in the setbacks a little bit more and have patience. And I think that's part of kingdom flourishing.
Yeah.
Like I really do.
Yeah. I'll go one more, and then you can either go one more or close it up.
Cool.
Because it's just beginning to stand out to me while you're saying that now, as it took 8 years.
Yeah. It's good.
Like they could have, I was trying to process in my mind, what's he saying? If it's quick fix, they could have, it would have been an ungodly amount of money to get truckloads and truckloads of topsoil that already had 9 billion microorganisms built in. And in some ways, that's what we try to do with previous model church planting, get an ungodly amount of money and like manufacture something. And that you could do that in that farming. Like if they had, Bill Gates type of money, it's like, just go buy truckloads of this soil and we'll spread it out everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, what would happen? It just all die.
Yeah.
Because there's not a biodiverse ecosystem to support the continual life, most likely it would die pretty quick. I don't know that because I'm not a sustainable farmer, but that's my guess.
But it might be your calling, it sounds like.
All right. But what they did do is they actually did spend a lot of financial resources to build a worm farm. Like that's one of the first things they put money into.
Yeah.
And they dump these worms in there, and then I think they called it like worm tea or something. They brewed like worm tea.
Yummy.
Like
it's like Dumb and Dumber. I got worms.
It's like they invested in, I'm trying to make the sort of the metaphor, but like they invested in some infrastructure that would support the long-term sustainability.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't want to just say
it wasn't like purely organic.
It goes back to that idea that like organic is not just slinging seed and hoping stuff happens. It's like it's fostering the environment where it can happen.
That's so good.
And being willing for it to take 8 years and to sink a lot of, like you can just see their heartbreak when stuff is the setback and they're like, do we give up now? Like, is this it? Is this the one? So just like, I know that doesn't sound very encouraging, but it is like, just keep going.
Yeah.
And do the slowdown, sit in the setback and go, what creativity is the Spirit inviting us into in this moment?
It's like when we're in our Ironman and we're, you're 100 miles, you're 80 miles into the bike ride. And it's just hit
I'm going to throw up if I eat one more of these things.
Keep going. I hit mile 11 on the run and I think I can't go anymore. My legs hurt. I'm going to keep going. Who cares about the rest of my life? No, I hear you. That's so good. All right. My last thought, and then we'll close this. It reminds me of what my friend Phil Leslie told us on one of our earliest podcasts years ago. He describes disciple making movements, and he says it's like a hockey stick where, like
we want the short term.
Yeah, like it's like a lot of times, and we'll see it sometimes even globally, just as not quite as long, but like the part that you actually hit the puck with, right, of the bottom of it, it's just like the shorter. It's still for a while. It's still flat for a while before it starts to incline into movement or incline into growth or whatever. He's like, I think maybe just in our Western context, or maybe it's all movements are like this, so we just don't know. Really, you need to flip that hockey stick upside down, and it's that long 8 years wait before you start to see that like incline of growth.
It's like boop.
It's the little one. Yeah, totally. I that reminds me. Yeah, where I think there is some kingdom math that's involved. It's just different than how we as Americans think.
Yeah,
and I think this whole conversation of castles and kingdoms, and it's just not how we think. We think castles. We think bigger. We think better. We think we're individual, freedom, success is influence and power. It is our default mindset as Americans. And I think this whole conversation invites us to think about a kingdom that is much more about a mustard seed. that grows
Yeah.
slowly and
Yeah.
takes over than it is like
Yeah.
we're
Amen.
gonna bring in and graft in this giant
Yeah.
tree. So good stuff, man. I'm glad we got to have this conversation, and hopefully you just finished your talk, your training that you have to do in a couple
Yeah,
weeks.
we'll figure that out.
Maybe you just push play
Yeah.
on this podcast. So good stuff, brother.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging in there with us today, doing a random episode. See you next week.